Hi guys. In this video, I would like to talk to you about a really fascinating civilization of Garamantes. Okay, let me ask you a question. How much do we know about ancient Rome? Well, we know quite a bit, but of course, there is a lot we do not know. So if you compare, like, let's say, how much we know about World War II, uh, current history versus how much we know about ancient Rome, I think it would be safe to say we know 10 times more about, what happened, during the 20th century than we know about ancient Rome, at least. Okay, I mean, this is pretty reasonable number. 10 times less we know about Romans than we know about events which happened closer to our time. And if you studied Roman history, even just a little bit, you have probably heard of the Punic Wars. Okay, so this was a war between Rome and Carthage. All right, so let me ask you this: how much do we know about the Carthaginians? Well, actually, we know 10 times less than we know about the Romans. Like we just know very little about the Carthaginians. I mean, compared to what we know about the Romans. So, 10 times less we know. And these guys, I will discuss with you today, Garamantes. We know 10 times less about Garamantes than we know about the Carthaginians. Okay, so you can kind of, get an idea about how mysterious this civilization is. Okay, there is really, very little historical work, research done about this topic, and I'd like to introduce you to this incredible civilization, Garamantes. Okay, so first of all, how do we know anything about the Garamantes? Well, history works with kind of there are two philosophies when it comes to history, and it's kind of curious that both of them work. Usually, branches of knowledge, they're just okay with just one approach, but history, works perfectly fine with two. That's kind of curious. So, like let's say mathematics, it's a purely scholastic discipline. It's just kind of intellectual. Books written about books and kind of interpretations. It's all you can say texts. Okay, it's people thinking, and it's very speculative. Okay, so that's something being a scholastic discipline, and also we have empirical, kind of you can say scientific, disciplines, such as biology. You just have experiments, physical evidence, and history. It's kind of incredible, but history is okay with both approaches. Okay, both work just fine. History is lots and lots of texts. Okay, it's commentaries about commentaries. Every year we get new books about Napoleon, about the Civil War, and they all shed new light. About some aspects. About mechanisms. How this led to that, and so yeah, history works with both. It's both a scholasticism and a science to some extent. Like it's physical and it's speculative. So as far as the scholastic side, the written sources for Garamantes, these are Herodotus and Pliny the Elder. Okay, so these are our scholastic sources, and the physical sources are archaeological excavations in Libya. Okay, so Garamantes lived in northern Africa, essentially in Libya, but they lived in a much greater territory than just Libya. But that's where their capital city was located. And by the way, they did not have really a capital city. They just had two major cities. They were kind of semi-nomadic people, perhaps. Well, they actually I don't know. They were nomadic to a large extent, you could say. Like what percentage of them settled in the city versus how much of them were nomads is I don't think anyone really knows. So Well, Herodotus says very, just mentions Garamantes, I believe, twice. Okay, so in his histories, book number 4, he mentions Garamantes, says, a couple of curious things about them that, they, live in Africa and, they have bulls which walk backwards. Like when these herd animals eat, they walk towards where their head is. But those Garmant bulls, they were walking backwards. Why? And the answer is because their horns were sort of bending the opposite way. So if you can imagine sort of an animal's head and horns being this way, the Garmant bulls horns were the opposite way, like so, like that. Okay, so if they walked in front of themselves, they would their horns would bump, they would hit the soil. So the only way for them to graze is to was by walking backwards. Okay, so that's one thing he says about them. And he says that they're pretty violent, not violent, but I guess you can say militant people. So they went on these kind of expeditions in which they were, what he calls they hunted mountain dwelling Ethiopians. And historians argue what exactly this means, but it seems like they were going on these raids to capture slaves. Okay, and in a different passage, Herodotus says something that kind of contradicts, what he says, that they, what contradicts, this passage about them being militant. And he says that they're, very peaceful people, and they don't even have, defense weapons. Okay. So that's pretty much all, Herodotus says about them, and Pliny says a little bit more. He kind of gives us more detail. For instance, he says, more the sort of geographic, facts. Specifically like how many, days you gotta walk from this point to reach, the Garamant settlement. Sort of the climate, their trading practices, but it's still pretty small. So that's pretty much the sources if you want to find out for yourself. And in the next video I will kind of tell you the story of the Garamants.